There we go. Cool. All right. Okay. So let's go ahead and get started. Yeah. So we're going to be doing, a demonstration on just how to kind of get started with a basic Rails React application that kind of does the CRUD actions on both of our models. So the parent model and then the child model that belongs to that parent model. And what we're going to be doing today is a Pokemon themed application. It's going to be a little Pokedex. So we're basically going to have an application with two models. We're going to have trainers, so the actual people that have the Pokemon, and then we're going to have the Pokemon themselves. So trainers will have many Pokemon, and the Pokemon will belong to the trainers. So that's going to be kind of what we're going to do. So we're just going to start at the beginning, and I'm going to kind of go through the process that I went through when I was a student, and so you can kind of like just see my process and like what I look to for reference, what I look to if I get stuck somewhere. Hopefully we'll maybe run into some bugs and whatnot. So yeah, that should be good. So cool. All right, let's go and get started. So let me hide those controls. Okay, so I am right now, I'm in a folder on my desktop. It's called current. It just has a whole bunch of random stuff that I am working on or was working on in the past. Just kind of a catch-all folder. In here is where I am going to generate and initiate my Rails project. So what I'm going to do for that is I'm just going to go to this sheet. So I think you guys all have access to this sheet. It's a really, really good reference. I look at it all the time, even still, just to make sure I'm like typing things in correctly and I'm not missing any like weird syntax stuff. So we're just going to kind of generate a new Rails project. So we're just going to start over here. We're in my folder that I want this project to live in. So I'm just going to type this out. So Rails new, let's just call this Pokedex fall 2021, and then we'll give it the -D flag. I'm going to call out the database here. We're going to give it the PostgreSQL type database. Then we need to make sure we add Webpack React. And just so you guys know, I'm just following this right here. And then I'm also going to do skip turbo links. I don't want to get too into like what that is or what that does. I've just seen that it has thrown some errors sometimes, so I'm going to be sure to add that. So we'll hit enter, and now we get to sit here and just kind of let it run. It's going to download all of the gems, all the libraries that we need for Rails to run. And when it's done generating, we will have a brand new folder in my current folder that will be called Pokedex Fall 2021, and it's going to just have a whole bunch of stock templated Rails folders and files that are just kind of ready to roll for us to use. So this always just kind of takes a little bit. So there's a lot of stuff to download. So we'll let that do its thing. Let's see. Cool. So let's keep going. When this is done, we're going to basically CD into it. We're going to open it up in code, and we're going to start kind of setting up the Rails project. Every time you start a new Rails project, the kind of the methods that you go through, the process to set it up is almost identical every time. Rails is very prescriptive in how you set things up, which can be helpful, especially when you're new, just because you always know the same steps to follow. So, okay, so it looks like it was successful. It downloaded, created everything. That's awesome. So if I do ls in my current folder, I should see it there. There we go, Pokedex Fall 2021. So I'm going to just feed into that. I'm going to auto complete that because there's nothing else that has a POK in the name. So we'll hit enter. Cool. Okay, we're inside of our project. I'm just going to do code dot, and we're just going to open this bad boy up. And I'm just going to bring this back over here. That. Cool. All right. Sweet. So here is our project. Looking good. Sweet. Okay. So the next thing that I want to do with this is there are some gems that I'm going to want to add to our project. The first gem is this React Rails gem. So to add gems, you always want to go to your gem file. This gem React Rails. I'm going to put this on line 28. So your gem file is usually set up into just your general gems, then development specific gems, test specific gems, and then development and test specific gems there. But this is going to be just a general gem, so I'm going to put it outside of all those. We'll put that right there. That's awesome. And then I have some other gems that I actually want to add. So I'm just kind of copying and pasting this actually over from an old project that I had from a while ago, which is like very common to do. I do that all the time. I just kind of like go back to old projects for reference. So these are a bunch of gems that you guys should know all of these. I'm going to put this in the development. So I'm going to add better errors, binding of caller, cry rails, and then my figure gem. Make sure we save that. So that's saved. Cool. All right. So we added our gem. Now we're going to run bundle. Bundle basically, every time we run it inside of our project folder, it's just going to look at our gem file and install any gems that aren't already installed into our project. So we just added a whole bunch of new gems. Well, not a whole bunch, like 5. So we're going to just run bundle. And that should add the gems that we need. Cool, there we go. That's looking good. So let's go back to here. Let's see what we need to do next. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is we need to configure this React Rails gem that we added. The way that we do that is by running this command inside of our terminal. So let's do that. So I'm just gonna bring this over here. You can see that. All right, we're gonna run bundle exec rails g react install. We'll run that. That's going to configure our React Rails gem for us. Let this do its thing. Cool. All right, so that's configured. That's great. The next thing we want to do is we want to create our database. That's usually the next step after you've added your gems, run them. We're going to create the database itself. To do that, I'm going to just do bundle exec rails db create. You don't have to add the bundle exec. It's just something that you can add. I've heard that if you don't use it, sometimes it can throw errors, especially down the line in a very mature project. But I don't know. It's just kind of a habit that I have. But all right, so we'll do that. And what that's going to do is that's going to create 2 databases for us. We've got the development database and the test database. We typically in this class, for the most part, will be using the development database. The test database is used for testing purposes. We'll talk about a little bit of testing a little bit later in the course, so we don't have to worry about that. But we'll create our 2 databases for us. That's great. That's looking good. Don't need to worry about this collab section. Okay, cool. So the next part that we're going to look at is generating our models. So let's do that. I'm just going to pull this over here just for reference. All right, so if you guys remember, the first model that we're going to do is going to be a like Pokemon like trainer model. So the actual like trainers themselves. So to do that, I'm going to do Rails G model trainer. And remember, whenever you generate models, they're always singular, not plural. So if you have trainers, whenever you generate the model, you need to make sure it's singular. So it's just trainer. Let's give our trainers a name. We'll have a string. Give them a location, maybe like a hometown. in the Pokemon universe string. That should be good for that. So let's run that. Cool, Rails G model trainer, great. So we have that model generated. So that generated a model file. So we should have a trainer.rb file inside of our models folder. And it should have also created a migration for us. So let's go into app, we'll go into models, and cool, there's our trainer file right there, which kind of represents our trainer model. And then it should have also generated a migration for us. Cool, right here. And when this migration file gets run, it's going to actually create a table for us in our database where we can add new trainers, delete trainers, et cetera. It's going to be kind of like a table or a bucket in our database. It's going to hold all of our trainers and their related information. All right, but we're not going to DB migrate yet. I like to create all of my models first, and then I usually will run DB migrate. So cool. All right, so we did that. So let's go ahead and create our new model. So we still need a Pokemon model. So we'll do Rails G model Pokemon. We'll give them a name. We'll give them like a sweet move that they can do. And then we'll also give them like a level, since your Pokemon can kind of like level up. So we'll give them an individual level. Whenever you generate a model that is going to belong to another model, you have to make sure to call that out when you generate that model. So I'm going to do trainer. I'm going to designate the model that's going to belong to. I'm going to do colon, and I'm going to do belong to. And we'll go ahead and hit enter. We'll generate that. Cool. So if we look here, we have our next migration file for the Pokemon table. You can see how, so Ruby on Rails automatically, it has like a really robust dictionary like built into it. And so it automatically will pluralize and singularize your models and such as needed. But obviously Pokemon's not like a standard word. So the plural function in our Rails app is going to be Pokemons for the Pokemon. So we're going to refer to it that way, just because it can't really handle words that are the same for singular and plural. So, there's one Pokemon, there's 6 Pokemon. In normal English, it doesn't change. But in Ruby on Rails, we're just going to tack on that S whenever we're referring to it in plurality. So cool. All right. So now we have our models there. That's awesome. That's looking good. So the next thing we want to do is once we get our models all generated, we're going to run Rails DB migrate. This is going to actually run our migration files that were generated when we generated our models. And it's actually going to create 2 tables in our database that will hold both our trainers, and then we'll have another table that will hold all of our Pokemon. So Rails DB migrate. Gonna run that. Sweet, there we go. Okay, so now we've got that set up. That's awesome. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to generate my controllers for my 2 models. So that's kind of the next step. So remember, we generated the brand new Rails project. We then set up our gem file. We ran bundle. Then we created the actual database. Then we generated our model. Then we migrated those into the database. And now we're going to do the controllers. So those steps are very prescribed. It's basically what you'll do every single time. All right, so we're going to need a controller for both of our models. So I'm going to do Rails G controller, and let's do trainers. Remember, when you do controllers, it's going to be plural. So it's going to be Rails G model in the singular. But when you do controllers, it's Rails G controller in the plural. So we do trainers with an S, and then I'm going to skip route because I want to set up my route manually, basically, and we'll go through that. So Rails G controller trainers, skip route, that should be good. And we'll do Rails G controller Pokemon, remember, because in this app, at least in the back end, we're going to be referring to plural Pokemon as Pokemon. And we'll skip out there. Cool. All right. So now we've got our controllers. That's great. The next thing I'm going to do is, I'm going to generate one more controller, and that's going to be a static controller. So static controllers and static pages are basically web pages on your website that are not going to need to have any access really to the database. So none of the data on it will change because it's not accessing any information in the database. Remember, all the information in the database can change. So kind of like if it has access to the database and it's using database information, it's kind of built into the assumption that that page is now kind of dynamic. That data can change if you change the data in the database. But I want to have kind of like a home page maybe for the site that'll maybe see like, welcome to the Pokedex, and then maybe have some buttons to like click to see like all the trainers, and then maybe another button to click to see like all the Pokemon sort of thing. So I'm gonna kind of control that home page using this static controller. So we'll get that set up. Okay, cool. All right, so the next thing that we want to do is looking at this. We want to configure the routes in our project. So I just shrunk that down, but there we go, cool. All right, so the routes is going to be inside of our config folder. I like to use a command in VS Code where I click Command P. That lets me search my file structure for my project, and you can search for any file in there. So I'm just going to search for routes. It kind of like just intelligently pulls up, search results for me. So I'm going to go ahead and just click that. Cool. We're in our routes. The routes are basically where we set up the URLs that are going to be part of our website. And you can go through and you can set each URL just manually. You can be like, we want to use the HTTP GET verb, and we want that to go to like maybe just our root there, or maybe we want it to go to like trainers, and then maybe like render a specific component or whatever. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to do a function that is built into Rails that automatically generates all of the necessary routes that we are going to need just automatically with like 2 lines of code. The way that we're going to do that is we're going to do resources, and we're going to do, actually we can do resources and then colon, and then we're going to basically give the names of our controllers. So we'll do trainers, and then we're going to do and we're going to do resources, Pokemon. So what that does is this is called nested routes, where we have routes inside of routes. And I'll kind of show you what this does in just a second. When we look at our Rails, our localhost 3000/Rails/info/routes, which will list out all of our routes, we'll kind of look and see what that does. But yeah, so we got that filled out. That's cool. One thing that we need to do though is we need to go to our models, and where are my models? Here we go. Okay. So whenever we generated the Pokemon model, if you remember, we actually like designated in the terminal, we were like Rails G model somewhere up here, Pokemon, and then we actually explicitly said trainer belongs to. So that's gonna that threw this into our model, which we need. But we also need to add something to our trainer model, and that trainer model needs to have a similar piece of code in there, but instead of saying it belongs to something, we need to say it has many Pokemons. And so we're going to say just has many, and then Pokemon, like that. And then we're going to add one more piece of code here, and that's called dependent destroy. What this does is, oh, I have a typo there. What this does is it says, if we end up destroying one of our trainers, it's also going to destroy any Pokemon that belong to that trainer, which is a good thing because we don't want to have any Pokemon that don't have a home, that aren't belonging to any trainers. It'll actually throw an error for us, and I'll show you why that would happen in just a second. So, okay, cool. So now we have our models, we have our controllers. Our controllers though are empty. They're just look like this. So there's just nothing in there. Actually, this one has index because when I generated it, I told it to start out with the index method. But yeah, we still need to fill these out. But yeah, so we've got those, we've got our models, we've got our routes set up. So that's all good. So the next thing that I want to do, so at this point, you can kind of go in a couple different directions. We can start trying to maybe like figure out our controllers and getting those set up. We can start maybe configuring or thinking about our front end and working on the React components, which will be the JavaScript files, which will kind of like render our actual web page for us. Or we can do like the seed file. So I think what I want to do right now is I want to maybe do the seed file just so we can get that set up. Because I like to, before I jump into the front end, where I'm actually creating like the React components and showing the way that the site is going to look, I like to have some data to play with so that I kind of see how things look. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm just going to go and open up my seeds file. You can see it's just blank. It has this like, basic comment here that just kind of shows you, what an example of what you can do inside of your seed file, but we can just ignore that for now. So right now, our database is completely empty. We have 2 tables in there, but there's no data in there. We don't have any trainers. We don't have any Pokemon. So we want to actually create some of that stuff. So what I'm going to do is, I know that I'm going to end up using the Faker gem. So let's go ahead and go here and let's look at our Faker gem really quick. So I think I had it pulled up. So the Faker gem actually has a Pokemon option in it where you can generate a random Pokemon. You can generate a random like location or like town in Pokemon, and you can generate a random like Pokemon move. So we're going to definitely want to use that for this. So I'm just going to kind of paste that down here, and I'm going to comment that out just so that, because I'm going to want to reference this. I'm going to want to be able to just copy and paste this into my seeds file when I need it. So I'm just going to put that there. And then I'm also going to want to generate some names for the trainers. So that's going to be in Faker default. Let's go look at name. Here we go. Oh, not mountain. Back. Name. And cool. And we just want to get just a basic theme here. So copy that, and we're going to use that too. And we'll comment that out. Cool. Okay, sweet. So we know that we're going to be using Faker. If you are going to use Faker for your seeds file, you have to not only have it added to your gem file right here, but you also need to require it in your file. So I'm just going to say require Faker. And now I can use Faker in this file. So the first thing that I like to add in my seeds file, and you don't always want to do this, but I like to just right out the gate destroy any models or any instances of my models that I might have. Because maybe somewhere down the line, I want to rerun my seeds file, but I want it to start fresh. And what this will do is if I run my seeds file and let's say I create 100 trainers and like 200 Pokemon, and then down the road, I'm like, you know what, I actually want to like add some attributes to these and that I didn't have before, or I want to kind of change things up a little bit. I want to be able to like reseed my database, but I want to overwrite my old one. An easy way to do that is to just throw this at the top, which is basically what will happen is every time you run your seeds file, it's going to hit this first. It's going to destroy all of my trainers, all of my Pokemon, and then it'll generate the trainers and the Pokemon that I want it to do. So that's what that does. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is generate some trainers. And I want to generate, I think, let's just say 10 trainers. So I'm just going to do a Ruby times loop. And the cool thing about the seeds file is it's really just like vanilla Ruby. You can just like write Ruby code in here and it will just run. So it's actually really easy and kind of fun, just because it just uses those basic like Ruby principles. So there's a loop in Ruby called the times loop. And basically when you do that, hit enter, it's going to run whatever code I put in here 10 times. So in this case, I want to create 10 trainers. So I'm just going to do 10.timesDo, and then I'm going to run my create trainer code here, and it's just going to do that 10 times. So I don't like to usually like copy and paste my faker stuff into my create methods just because it starts to look really messy and weird. So I'm actually just going to create a variable. I'm going to call it name, and then I am going to copy that and put that there. So now name is going to equal just a random name from faker. So that's cool. So I think the other attribute for our trainers was the location. So I'm just going to double check that. Open up my schema. The schema just kind of shows you all of your models and what attributes they have. So trainers have name and location. So that's cool. So we're going to need a name, and we're also going to need a location. I'll do that. I'm going to copy and paste that there. So now location is going to equal a random location in Pokemon. And then I want to actually create my trainers. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to set this to a variable that I'm going to call trainer, and I'll show you why in just a sec. And then I'm going to call my create method. So trainer.create, and then I'm going to give some arguments. These arguments are going to be the values for the attributes on this model. So it's going to be a bunch of key value pairs. So we have a name attribute, and then we have a location attribute. So whatever value I put here is going to be assigned to that specific trainer's name attribute. Same for the location. So what I want this name to equal is just a random faker name. But instead of pasting this here, which I can do and it would work, but it's just a little messy for me, I'm just going to put name. Because remember, I set name to equal that. So that's just going to give it a random name. And then I also want to just give it a random location. So cool. So this is going to create 10 trainers for me. And each of those trainers is going to have a random name assigned to it and a random like Pokemon location assigned to it. Then I want to give each of these trainers, let's say 5 Pokemon. So what I'm going to do actually, and there's a bunch of ways to do this, and I'm actually going to do this in a slightly different way than I think what James did in lecture, just to kind of show you an additional way to do this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to run a times loop inside of this times loop. So basically, for 10 times, I want to create a trainer, but then for every trainer that I create, I want to create a Pokemon 5 times. So you're going to create a trainer, and then while it's still on that one trainer, it's going to create 5 Pokemon. I'm going to set those Pokemon to belong to this trainer. That is why I set it to this variable right here. So now I can reference the trainer that I created here with this variable. So in here, I can say trainer, which is talking about the trainer that I just created, dot Pokemon, which lets me access the Pokemons that will belong to this trainer. And that is allowed because of the way we set up our models. So they have a has many relationship. I can do trainer.pokemon.create. And then I believe my Pokemon had a name, they had a move, and they had a level. Cool. All right, sweet. So what this will do is, let's just walk through it again. We're going to hit this loop. It's going to do this 10 times. The first time, going to, set that variable, create one trainer. Then for that one trainer, it's going to create 5 Pokemon that will belong to that trainer. And we're going to give each of those Pokemon a name, a move, and a level. So I'm going to do kind of the same thing that I did before. Let me just kind of drop that down. But I'm going to set some new variables in here for the Pokemon data. So I'm going to do Pokemon name equals, and I'm going to do Pokemon move equals, and I'm going to do Pokemon level equals. And then that's where I'm going to take this stuff. So for the Pokemon name, I want to set that to that. For the Pokemon move, you want to set that to that. And then for the level, I think in Pokemon, I haven't played it since about 5th grade, but I think you can get your Pokemon levels from all the way from 1 to 99 is the max. So what I'm going to do actually is we can, in Ruby, you can set a range of numbers. You can say okay, from 1 to 99, and then you can call a function on that will grab a random number from that range. The way that you do that is you do rand, and then you give it the range inside of there. So if you do 1.99, that's called a range in Ruby. And this range is going to be all of the numbers between 1 and 99, and it's going to include both 1 and 99. So the Pokemon level is just going to be equal to a random number between 1 and 99, including both of those numbers. So now down here for these values, I'm just going to pass in these variables that I wanted, that I set. We'll do Pokemon name. We'll do Pokemon move, and then we'll do Pokemon level. Cool. All right. So that looks pretty good. I think I'm missing an end statement here. So this dude goes to that end, but this dude does not have an end. So I'm definitely missing that. Let me bring this up a little bit. There we go. So let me add that. Cool. Okay. Sweet. So I think that this should work. And then what I usually like to do, I don't need that anymore, is I just do a little put statement that just shows me when I run my seeds file, some of the data that I get. So when the seeds file runs at the very end, I wanted to put out a statement in the console. And I wanted to say seeded, I'm going to interpolate something. And I'm going to call my trainer model. I'm going to say trainer.all.length. So that's going to give me an array of all of my trainers and then call the .length property on it. So it's basically going to give me the number of trainers that I generated. So seeded, this number of trainers, and I'm going to interpolate Pokemon.all.length Pokemon, period. And I hit save. Okay. So there is our seeds file. Do you guys have any questions about the seeds file? Cool. All right. So let's go ahead and run this guy and see how it does. It might fail. I might have an error in here somewhere, but we'll see. So we're inside of our file, and I'm just going to do Rails cd seed. See what it does. So it's running. Cool. All right. So it gave me my message that I told it to, and it says seeded 10 trainers and 50 Pokemon, which is exactly what I expected. So one way that I can kind of verify this beyond just seeing the numbers of trainers and Pokemon that I generated and that I now have is I can go into my Rails console, and this kind of gives you access to your database through your command line. So it's a really good tool for the developer to kind of just get in and sort of look at the information in your database through your terminal. So we're in Rails C, and now I can just call my trainer model, and I can do trainer.all. And cool, here's all my trainers. So I have Ellen Ledner from Solacion Town, wherever that is. Shanita Osinski from Fall Arbor Town. Benny, blah, 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 whatever. So yeah, I've got all these trainers. I can keep going down. There we go. So we have 10 trainers with IDs 1 through 10. Cool. Then I can also check the Pokemon that belong to one trainer. I want to make sure that each of these trainers has Pokemon that belong to them and that generated correctly. So I'm just going to do trainer.first. That's going to access the first trainer, the trainer with the lowest ID number in my database, dot Pokemon. And that's going to drill down into the Pokemon that belong to my trainer with an ID of 1, which I think was like, we'll find out. I can't really remember. But, oh yeah, it didn't list it, but it's where was it? Ellen Ledner. So I ran trainer.first of Pokemons, and here we go. It gave me these 5 Pokemon. So Magikarp with a psychic move with the level 28, a Venonat with a flamethrower move with a level of 82, super strong Venonat. Yeah, so all those. So I know that she got 5 random Pokemon, the moves were randomly generated, and even the levels randomly generated. So that looks pretty good. So I think we're probably pretty safe to know that our data was generated correctly. So that's cool. All right, so the next thing that I'm going to do now is I think I want to start to work on my controllers a little bit. And I think actually I'm going to try to get that main page set up. So I'm just going to really quickly, I'm going to run Rails S. And I just want to make sure that nothing is like super broken. I'm going to go to my localhost 3000. Okay, cool. So yay, you're on Rails. That's great. So everything is working as it should. Cool. Okay, so now what I want to have happen though is when we go to this main page, I want for there to be a splash page, like a home page that says like the Pokedex, and like maybe have some buttons that you can click on to navigate to see all the trainers and all the Pokemon and such. So this is going to be a static page. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go into my static controller, and I have that index method there. And in there, I'm just going to say, okay, if we hit our static controller and then we run the index method, I want to render a specific component. And I want that component to be called home, because it'll just kind of be like the home page. So that's simple. That's really all we need to do here. So if we hit the static controller and we get to the index method, we want to render our home React component. Then I'm going to set this up in our route. So we have the route set up for our trainers and for our Pokemon, but we don't really have one set up for our static home page. And that's going to be for just the localhost 3000, no suffixes or slashes kind of appended to it, just the main home page. To get access to that in our route, you just type root. That's just going to be your home page, just localhost 3000, or when this goes live, whatever just your .com is, just the main home page. We're going to say root, and then you pass in a string. And then what you do is you first type out the name of the controller that we want to hit. So whenever we go to this home page, localhost 3000, we want to hit our static controller. And then in our static controller, we now say the method that we want to run. And we separate those two by this hashtag symbol. So what this says is, okay, at the root, which is this guy right here, just the main home page, hit our static controller and then run the index method. So what should happen now is when we go here, it's going to hit this controller, it's going to look for the index method, and it should render out the component home. So let's just refresh this and see what happens. It should break because I haven't yet created this component for home. So this should throw an error for us. Thinking about it. Yep, there we go. So encountered error. You likely forgot to export your component from the file it's defined in. Yeah, that's true, because I don't even have a home file inside of here. So that's a problem. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open up my terminal inside of here. And we want to now generate a React component, which is going to serve up some stuff, some visual stuff to our website here. So let's go to, it'll be an app, and it'll be inside of JavaScript components. And we want to put all of our JavaScript components inside of here, all of our React components in there. So in my terminal, I'm just going to go cd app JavaScript. I already have that typed out, but components, we'll go there. And then I'm just going to touch a file. We're just going to call it home.js. So what touch does, remember, that just creates a file. So hit that, and boom. Now we have our home.js file. So cool. Now we're just going to set up a React component. So I usually like to import React first. Why is my thing working? Thinking about it. There we go. So I have some shortcuts that I've set up for React to just kind of like get through some of the basic setup. But we want to import React from React. And then the second part, I should say, of a React component is sort of defining the component. And really, all React components are, at least right now, that you have to worry about, they're really just like big functions. They're big fancy functions in JavaScript. So to write a function in JavaScript, you start with the word const, then you give it the name. For React components, we always want to name it. Usually it's the same thing as the file name. So home.js, we'll call this component home. You do an equal sign, you parentheses, you do an arrow, and then you do curly braces. That's kind of like always, it's going to be your basic like template for a named component, or sorry, a named component, but also a named function in React. So we got that. The next part of a React component is it needs to have a return statement. Basically, every React component has to have a return statement inside of it. And usually that will be the last thing inside of that component. So in here, I'm just going to give it a div. And this is where we write the actual JSX, which is just fancy HTML, basically, that we can use in React. So remember, JSX always goes in return statements. So in this return statement, we're going to have a div, and I'm going to have an h1 tag, and I'm going to call this welcome to the Pokedex. And then let's give it an h2 tag, and let's just say Pokemon for life with a Y because we're cool. And yeah, I think that's probably good for now. The last thing we need to do is we need to export our component. So you just do that by saying export default and then the name of that component. In this case, it's going to be home. So let's save that, and cool. So now, if we go to our routes, if we go to our root, which is localhost 3000, it should hit the static controller and look for the index method. So it should hit the static controller, look for the index method, and then render our home component, which we have now created. So we should see that welcome to the Pokedex, that H1 tag, and then this Pokemon for life H2 tag. So let's refresh this, and fingers crossed that it'll work with no bugs. I don't think I did anything wrong, but I definitely could have. So we'll see. Cool, there we go. Welcome to the Pokedex, Pokemon for life. So that's awesome. Here's kind of our home page. So cool. All right, so what I want now is I basically want two buttons here that will say maybe view all trainers and view all Pokemon. So let's get those set up. I'm just going to add some breaks here, which is kind of add some spaces beneath this H2 tag. And then I'm going to add a button. This button is going to say view all trainers. And then I'm going to add another button. And this is going to say view all Pokemon. Save that. Oh, I think I need actually a break tag here, or else they'll be on the same line. We'll save that. And I'm gonna actually add one more to give it extra space. Cool. Let's refresh this, just make sure those buttons show up. Cool, there we go. Now we got the two buttons, but they're not really doing anything. So what I'm gonna do is there's a couple different ways to do this, but and we're actually gonna do these very differently in the future. Well, not very differently, but a little bit differently, but you don't have to worry about that. At the moment, what I'm gonna do is I essentially want, when I click this, I wanna go to a new page that shows me all of my trainers, right? So we can actually look at what that page is going to look like. If we go to localhost 3000/rails/info/routes, and we're going to get this page. So look at all these routes that we have here. We don't really need to worry about these ones down here. Those are kind of like just kind of routes that come out of the box for various functionality in Rails. You don't need to worry about those. But look at all these. Like we have all these trainers routes. We have all these Pokemon routes. We have our static route right here that we added. All of these routes are here because we did this: resources, trainers, do, resources, Pokemon. This resources keyword creates all of the standard CRUD routes that we're going to need for our app. So you can see we've got like our Pokemon's index route, which the index method is typically when it's for a model controller, it's going to show all of, like list out all of that model, so all of the Pokemon. We got the create method and route, which will allow us to create a new Pokemon. We've got the new method, which allows us to go to a page that has a form on it for us to actually create a new Pokemon. We've got the edit, we got show. Show allows us to just see, it's a page like dedicated to a single Pokemon. So maybe if you have your list of Pokemon, you click on one, it's going to take you to like the Pikachu page if you click on Pikachu, or like the Bulbasaur page. It'll just have all the information for like the Bulbasaur or whatever. Update, destroy, etc. Then we also have the same thing for trainers. So not only do we have all these CRUD methods that were added here, but we also have all these URLs that correspond to each of these methods. So you can see that like the trainers one is like pretty like simple. Like the trainers index is going to be localhost 3000/trainers. So if we go here, this should list all of our trainers. We have to set that up first, but this is the route that we'll use for that. If we do create, or actually let's do show. Where's show? Show, that's going to require the localhost 3000/trainers/ID. So if we type in an ID for a specific trainer, it's going to take us to a page that is going to have, it's going to be the page that's for that specific trainer whose ID that belongs to. So that's kind of how that works there. The Pokemon one are a little bit more complicated looking. Because our Pokemon belong to a trainer, we're going to need to access a trainer ID as well as the Pokemon, because that is what this nested route does. When we put resources trainers do and then resources Pokemon, that adds for our Pokemon routes the addition of this trainer portion here. This allows us to find a specific ID for a trainer and then have access to all of the Pokemon that only belong to that specific trainer. So that's kind of what's going on with that portion right there. So cool. So what we want to do is we have this button here to view all trainers. When we click that, we want to go and see a page that shows all of our trainers. So we know that that route is going to be our trainers index route, because the index method is going to list all of our trainers. So we're going to need that URL /trainers. So let's actually add that in really quick. So around this button, this URL trainers button, I'm actually going to add an A tag, which is the tag in JSX and HTML that lets you link things. I think most of you probably know that, but just in case. Then I'm going to add that URL. So notice I didn't have to put localhost 3000/trainers. If you just do slash and then whatever, it's just going to know that, okay, you want to do your root first and then the slash and whatever is after that. So we can just call in quotes /trainers, and it's going to know that we mean localhost 3000, or like Pokedex.com, say once we actually make this live on the web. So href trainers, I'm going to close that tag, and then I'm going to cut that. And this way, my button is completely surrounded by my A tag. So we'll save that. Now we come back here, we'll refresh this page. And now if I click this, this should take us to localhost 3000/trainers. Let's click that. Okay, sweet. So that worked in that, like, I was expecting this in my URL. This is not working though, and it says the action index could not be found for trainers controller. So what this is really saying is when we go to this URL inside of our app, and that's what the get keyword is whenever you type in a URL and you hit enter, you're basically running a get command inside of Chrome. When we get a URL with the /trainers, we want to hit our trainers controller and then run the index component. But if we go to our trainers controller, okay, so it can hit this controller, that's cool, it exists, but we don't have that index method in here. And now we do, but it's like blank, like there's nothing in there that it's doing. So what we want to have happen here is we want this to say, okay, when we go to this URL, or sorry, not that one, this one, blah, 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 /trainers, we want to hit our trainers controller, just like it says that we will do right here. So /trainers takes us to the trainers controller, hit the index method, and we then want to render a specific React component where maybe we can list out all of that stuff, but we don't have any of that filled out yet. So that's what we're actually going to do next. So in the index controller, remember, index is really for listing out / showing all the instances of the model. So in this case, the model is going to be the trainer model, and we want to list out all of the instances of that model. That's going to be each trainer, so they all have their names and their location and whatever. So what we're going to do is I'm going to set a variable. I'm just going to call it trainers, and this is an instance variable, so you get the @ symbol there. I'm going to set this equal to trainer.all. So remember, when we were in our Rails console, actually, let me just do it. I'll do it down here in this terminal. Let's see, back some more. Okay, cool. Let's go to Rails C. Remember, when I'm in Rails C, I now have access to the database through my terminal, and I can type in Ruby commands here, and it'll run. If I do trainer.all, that's going to get me all of my trainers. And you can see that it's inside of an array. So you see that kind of like bracket right there, the opening bracket. Then it has the first trainer, has all of its information here. Then it gets separated by like a comma. You can't really see it in here because we have binding.pry, or not binding.pry, Rails pry in here, which sort of like makes the results in your Rails console a little bit prettier. But what this really is it's an array of hashes. And each of these trainers are a hash. And so they have like a bunch of key value pairs, like the ID key for the value of 1, the name key for the value of Ellen Ledner, etc. So when I say @trainers equals trainer.all, @trainers is going to kind of look something like this. It's going to look, so I was going to, I mean, this is kind of dumb, but it's going to look kind of like this. Like it'll be an array of hashes. The first hash would be like ID1, and the name would be like Ellen Ledner, etc. And then like when that one's done, the next hash would be ID2, and the name would be, what is that name? Like Shanita Osinski, whatever, etc. So it's going to look like this essentially. And that's what we want. We want to be able to get this array of hashes from our database of all of our trainers, and we want to somehow be able to pass that to our JavaScript, to our React component, which is in charge of putting stuff on the web page. We want to be able to pass that array of hashes to the front end, to React, and then we can use that to basically display all of that information using our React component. So that's kind of what we're doing when we do this at trainers equals trainer.all. The next thing we want to set is we want to make this render a specific component, and we want to render a component called trainers. So we'll call it trainers, and then we want to send this component some props. So when we send props like this, what we do is we really just send a hash, and that hash, you know, like all hashes, has a key value pair. The key is trainers, and in this case, the value is this variable that we set, this at trainers. And remember, this at trainers is equal to trainer.all, which is really an array of hashes, and each of those hashes is one of our trainers. So this is how we're sending that array of hashes, that data from our database of all of our trainers. This is how we're going to send it to React, is through props. And this is saying we're going to render component trainers, and then we have a comma here, and we set the props here. This here links these together. And so when we write out the props here, these props are going to be available in our trainers component. Cool. Okay. So we've got that set up. So the next thing we want to do is we want to actually create the file, the React component for trainers, which we don't currently have. Right now we just have home. So I'm going to cd into app, that's a component, and I'm going to create a trainers.js file. Cool. All right, so now we have trainers. All right, so I'm just going to do imr, import React. I'm just going to set this up just like normal. So we'll do trainers equals, I don't want to do it. We got the equals, we got our parentheses, we got our arrow, and we've got our curly braces. Cool. And then remember, we're going to have a return. I'm just going to, just for now, just add a div in here. And I'm going to give it one. It's going to say trainers, because this is going to be the page. It's going to show all of our trainers. So maybe we want to have a title at the top that says trainers. And then I'm going to make sure I don't forget to export this. So export default trainers. Cool. All right, so let's save that. Okay. So there's something special that we need to do with this component. Remember, in our controller, we are passing some props to our trainers component. Remember, the props is just the way that we can pass data from our controller to our React component. And it's a bunch of data and information from our database. In this case, we're passing the trainers variable, which is the array of all of our trainers. The way that we can get access to this inside of our React component is to add the props argument inside of these parentheses. And then we now have access. Like just by doing that, we now have access to here. So this props links to this props, and that props equals this. Now, the way that we actually access this value is through the key here. So we need to do, and we have to use the props keyword. So we could say props dot trainers. So props dot trainers is using this key here, this trainers key. That's what this trainers is referring to. We could say props dot trainers. That props.trainers, again, is equal to trainer.all because it's equal to this @trainers. @trainers is equal to trainer.all. And remember, trainer.all is the array of hashes of all of the trainers in our database. So, okay, I'm just going to delete that for now. And we're going to test the props in just a second. But first, I want to just make sure that this is working. We've done a lot of coding and we haven't actually tested very much, which is actually not a good thing to do, but I digress. So let's just go back to our homepage, go back here and let it load for a sec. Cool, okay. So now when I click this should work because it's going to go to localhost 3000/trainers. And based on our routes, when we go to /trainers, it's going to hit our trainers controller, and then it's going to look for the index method. It's going to run the index method. In the index method, remember, we're rendering out that trainers component, which we just filled out right here. So this should show up. We should see the text trainers. So let's try that. Let's click that. Sweet, there we go. Okay, there's our trainers. That's awesome. Cool. All right, so let's test something. Let's just test really quick that our props are coming through. And what we can do is we can actually console.log props.trainers. We'll save that. What this is going to do is console.log is very similar to like puts or like p in Ruby. But what it does is it actually will give you a message in your console inside of your DevTools. So the way that you get your DevTools, you can hit right click and inspect like that, or you can hit Command-Alt-J and it will also pull that up for you. So cool. All right, so what we're doing now is we've added this line console.log props.trainers. So what we should expect to see is inside of this console, we should see an array of hashes of all of our trainers. So let's refresh the page and let's see if that works. Here, let me just pull this up. Okay, sweet, there we go. So it logged it twice. We're not going to worry about that for now, but we can now see that we got an array. So you can see the opening curly brace right there, or the opening square bracket right there. So we know it's an array. It also says it's an array right here, but it's an array of hashes and of all of our trainers. So that's awesome. So now what we want to do is we want to somehow get this data to show up on our front end. So we've successfully passed the props from our controller into our React component. Now we want to get this data to show up here. So the way that we're going to do that is we're going to actually use a function, and we're just going to call it const render trainers equals. So remember, when you write a function, it's just const the name equals parentheses arrow bracket or curly braces. That's like usually always how you're going to do it. What we want to do is, because this is an array of hashes, we can actually use a looping method that is going to basically go over our array and run code on each individual trainer. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually tell it to return JSX on each individual trainer. So whenever you do that in React, you're typically going to use a map method, and you need to always have a return before it. It's just kind of, I actually don't know exactly why off the top of my head, like right now. There's definitely like a reason for it, but for now, just remember, you always have to have a return statement for your map method. So I'm going to say return, and then I'm going to do props.trainers because that's our array of hashes. I'm going to say .map. And then inside of here, just like when we do like .each or .map in Ruby, where you can do like, blah, 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 .each, and then do, and then in like your like pipes, you can set sort of a placeholder variable. We're going to do that exact same thing. So I want to call each trainer just trainer. And you do that in parentheses. And then you actually don't need the parentheses, but we'll put those there. Then you add an arrow, then your curly braces. Then inside of here is where we kind of write out the JavaScript or the JSX that we want to have happen on each trainer. So it's going to go through our array of hashes. It's going to call each of those trainer one at a time, and then we can reference it by calling trainer inside of here. So what we really want to do is we want to return some JSX, like that. And let's say we want to just return a div for each of our trainers. And let's say we want to just put the trainer's name in an H2 tag. So what I did is, yeah, we're just returning a div and then an H2 tag and then the trainer name. So to access the attributes of your model, you have to call, the actual variable that we're assigning it here. And then you can use dot notation to get it. So you can do like dot name. We could also do dot location if we wanted to show the location. And then we have to use curly braces because whenever you add JavaScript into JSX, the JavaScript has to be surrounded by curly braces. And this trainer here is technically JavaScript because it's part of this dot map function. So we're going to do h2 trainer dot name. Okay, so we have our method defined here. Now we just need to call it. So I'm just going to call it underneath our trainers. I'm just going to add some breaks here just to give it some space. Don't want that. And this will be the last thing we do for today, and then maybe we'll wrap this up next week. But now I'm going to call this function. So again, we have to use curly braces because we're using JavaScript inside of our JSX. I'm going to say render trainers, and when we call a function in JavaScript, you have to add the parentheses at the end. So now, if I hit save, I come over here and hit refresh, we should now see all of our trainers' names like kind of just listed out. Cool, there we go. Sweet. So there is all of our trainers right there. So yeah, so we're kind of at time. I don't want to like go over. So I'm going to end this right here for today. We can do more on this like next week probably. But yeah, does anyone have any questions about what we went over in this homework review today, or even just like your homework assignments that you've been working on for the past couple of days?
I mean, I'm okay if you just want to keep going with this.
Yeah, like I could go on for a little bit longer if people want to stay. I know like James is here. So like let me like stop sharing really quick and I'll stop the recording.